All right. I'm here with the one, the only Mr. Spike Cohen. What's going on, man?
I'm doing good, man. Thanks for having me back on.
The first time on since I am not driving over the road anymore. Now I'm working
Yes, you're in an
local.
actual, it looks like you're in a stick-built
I'm
home
in a
of some
room.
kind. That is
Yes, I'm in a room.
that is awesome, man.
so so you've been working with this church in North Carolina on
Yep.
keeping their homeless shelter open, and there's been a lot of the city, is it the city or the county, is coming
It's
down
the
on
city.
them. Yeah,
Yep.
coming down on them, trying to shut them down. So what's going on there? Like, walk us through this whole process. What's happened? How did this begin? And where we stand now?
Yeah, so the headline is we are trying to help a pastor and his congregation keep the city from stealing his church for the crime of feeding homeless people and helping them get back on their feet. That's the initial sentence of what we're doing. The longer story is I run an organization called You Are the Power, and what we do is we find people who are being abused by their local governments. And we help organize our 3,000 strong membership across the country and the local community of wherever that thing is happening to organize against it. And we help grow the movement one cause at a time, and or actually multiple causes at a time. But so this was one of the causes we found out about it. There was another one that was also going on in Gastonia where a homeless veteran was being beaten by the police and wrongfully arrested. They tased his PTSD service dog, who later died, and then they refused to release the body cam footage, and they were trying to put him away for many years for crimes he didn't commit. What ended up happening, thanks to our help and involvement and everyone that got involved and helped organize for justice, was he ended up having the charges dropped against him. The body cam footage was released. He is now in the process of suing the city and the police department and everyone else involved. And there's a lot of accountability being had finally. While we were doing that, we also found out about this case. A man named Pastor Moses Colbert, who has been feeding homeless people for the better part of 20 years now out of his church, which is called Faith, Hope, and Love. And I have spoken to some of his congregants who were former or are formerly homeless and formerly addicted to drugs and many other things themselves, who have now been clean for many, many years, and who are now part of his congregation and now helping others who are in the same circumstance they were 5, 10, 15 years ago, sometimes only a couple years ago. And so he's literally building a community, a flock of people, many of whom were once living on the streets and once dealing with mental health issues and trauma. A lot of them are veterans dealing with mental health problems and addiction issues and all sorts of stuff, and working together to get each other up and on their feet and productive and happy and healthy members of society, helping them reconnect with their families, all sorts of incredible stuff. The problem is the city government of Gastonia desperately wants a homelessness crisis because that's how you get lots of state and federal money, millions and millions of dollars, to deal with the homelessness crisis. We know this because they keep talking about the homelessness crisis that they largely don't have when you compare to other cities in the greater Charlotte area. When you go to Gastonia, it's nothing like some of the other cities, and it largely because of Pastor Moses and his congregation and now other churches in the area that are helping them to deal with this issue voluntarily. And so the city is missing out on millions of dollars that they want. And if it means shutting down a church and stealing the property and pushing about 100 to 150, give or take, people that are currently have a home that are living on that property, kicking them back out on the streets and into the woods and causing them to go back, fall back into addiction and, do desperate things for money and, all the things that happen when you're living on the streets and cause, them to die and deal with overdoses and everything else, and make the public resentful and fearful and angry and say, we demand a solution. And now the politicians can step in and say, oh, yeah, we just need millions of dollars and we can fix that. But if they let Pastor Moses continue to do what he's doing, then the general public looks at them and says, well, what do we need these guys for? What do we
Mm-hmm.
need politicians for if we can solve our problems ourselves? And they definitely can't allow that. So they're fighting tooth and nail against it.
So what is the what bearing are they leaning on to
Yep.
stop Pastor Moses?
Yeah, so they're claiming that he is in violation of multiple bylaws. the unforgivable sin
Right.
of being in violation of some, odd bylaw that usually isn't even enforced. But they're claiming that he's in violation of multiple bylaws. A lot of them are around, one of the things that we did, when we first heard about Pastor Moses, the first time they tried shutting him down until we applied public pressure and they let him reopen, we found out that he needed some additional space for things like job training, bringing in people to do, weekly psychological counseling, mental health coaching, education, providing substance abuse counseling room and stuff like that. And so we got we were able to find people who donated 2 single wide trailers. They're not currently being used, but the city is claiming that they're in violation of various bylaws. One of them, in fact, one of the few that they'll actually name the thing that's being violated, is that they don't have ADA compliant ramps to the door. Well, they're not being used. They're not hooked up. They're literally there while they're figuring out how they're going to use them.
Mm.
So, okay, they don't have a ramp yet, but it's also not being used yet. So they're literally just sitting there on the property. And
So is that the code violation they keep speaking of? Because they keep saying there's a code violation. It's like, all right, like, were there roaches everywhere, or is there feces all over the floor? Like, what is this code violation?
no, and that's the thing. The 2 things they've actually named, because what they do is they'll send him this large list of numbers. You violated this code, this code, this code on this date, on this date, on this code, and this code. And it's like, okay, but I've read the code. I'm not seeing what it is I'm in violation of here. You're not showing me an instance of this. They're just racking it up so they can say that he owes them, I think at last count, $60,000, which they know he can't afford. But the only 2 that they've actually named are the ramp, and that there at one point was a significant amount of trash on the non-road visible side of his private property. And they said, okay, all right, fine, we'll clean it up. So they actually had a cleanup day where all the residents there at Faith, Hope, and Love went around and cleaned up every last can, every last, wrapper, or every last whatever. But I mean, you go to any public property or parking lot, you see this stuff. They're not going to fine Walmart for every time that there's a bag left there. That Walmart would have to pay millions of dollars in fees. And that's actually on property that is visible to the road and people can see. This is on the other side of the church where the public can't even see it. It's not visible unless you actually go onto his property. Now it's not visible at all. They've removed it. So now the last update, we're actually gonna, I believe this week we're gonna find out. I think it's actually tomorrow on the 8th. They're having their next meeting, their next hearing, and the city has claimed that they're going to work with Pastor Moses. We're hoping that means that they're backing off. They've backed off. We've gotten them to back off a lot before. They've backed off with the first time that they just shut him down outright, and we got them to pressure them to allow him to reopen. We got them to back off when it came to Joshua Rohr, the veteran I was talking about, and now Joshua is suing them, all of them, and their social media director who was slandering them, and the police department. I'm hoping that they're realizing that they're creating their own problems, and this is only going to get worse, and the public's going to get more and more upset until they just back off and respect us as human beings and allow us to help each other.
Yeah, because one of the things that really struck me whenever I ran into the story was like, wait, like you're getting upset because a private citizen is trying to help people.
Yeah.
I mean, it just seemed so absurd on its face. It's like, wait, so you have all these instances where private citizens victimize people and never pay consequences, but if you're trying to help somebody, you get your church shut down. Like you said, and you said in your speech, I was able to watch that earlier. Whenever you stood up before the city council, like, this is an incentive problem. Like, your incentives are all backwards.
Yeah. It is an incentive problem. And government is really nothing if not a series of perverse incentive issues. And that's the problem is government is an institution who has very often an incentive to either create a problem, allow a problem to continue to remain, or in some cases allow it to get worse, because they get more money that way. I remember being like I don't know, 8, 9-year-old kid, and there was a cartoon called Cops. And one of the episodes, and of course it was always the cops were the good guys, and the you know, the whatever the gang was called were the bad guys, right? But I remember there was one episode where the bad guy turned out to be one of the cops, and the reason that he was committing crimes and hiding as a criminal was because that way the cops would always have a job. And that I guess crime had been going down so much because the cops were doing a good job. He was worried they were going to lose their jobs. And I remember, you know, what was I, probably 7, 8, maybe 9 years old, watching that, going, "Holy crap!" Like, you know, if they fix the problem, they'll lose their jobs. And that was the first time I realized perverse incentives. And you know, that's what we're looking at here. I do suspect that they're, if not going to completely back off, I do think we have them somewhat on the ropes. One of the people that's really made themselves a villain is running for mayor. It is not going well. And the reality is, you know, he's been the one who has said things like, well, if Pastor Moses wanted to help the poor, why didn't he reach out to us and tell us? Why the hell does he need to tell you anything?
Yeah.
This man's been doing it for I think 17 or 18 years. Who are you? Like, he hadn't even heard of you until you started, you know, threatening him and trying to take his property. Like, who are you to tell this you know, this pastor and his congregation, this human being and a bunch of other human beings who are trying to help other human beings, that they can't do it? And one of the reasons you're giving is that they didn't essentially ask your permission first.
No, it's like that group. I can't remember the name of the group, but they go to Dallas every year, and they always show up with AR-15s, and they're feeding the homeless. Well,
Yes.
They can get fined and imprisoned for feeding the homeless without licenses, and so they just like show up armed, and like they've never had an issue. It's like, all right, weird. Well, yeah, it's like
how odd that the government doesn't want an armed confrontation with people who are doing absolutely nothing wrong.
Right. Feeding people. Here, let me give you a burger, you know, like, okay. So, and there are a lot of places that they're making it like where it's illegal. Like, I remember whenever I was younger, I just started working full time. I graduated high school when I was 17. So I started working full time when I was 17 years old. And there was a homeless guy that stood at the corner of Mason Road and I-10 there in Katy, Texas. And whenever I would exit there, I'd always see him. And finally, one day I just struck up a conversation with him while I was sitting at the red light. He was a Vietnam veteran suffering from Agent Orange. Like, and he had nowhere to go. He had no skills as far as anybody was concerned, because all he knew from the time he was like 17, 18 years old was war, you know. And then he comes back with PTSD. They called it shell shock back then. He had this Agent Orange was causing cancer, so he was pretty much unemployable. The government was completely just pushing him aside. So every payday I got paid every other week. So every other Thursday I would pull up there, and right across from where he stood was a McDonald's, and I'd pull up and I'd wave at him. I'd pull into the McDonald's. He'd run over there. I'd buy him food. You can't do that a lot nowadays. Like, you have to have a license to do that nowadays.
You have to pay government in most major or even really any kind of metro area. That's become kind of standard under the model penal code. It's kind of become standard that to protect the public from, you know, bad actors, we shouldn't be allowed to feed people without a license for free. I'm not even talking about having a restaurant, although I mean, we can have that argument as well. But this is literally just, like you said, buying food at a restaurant that is licensed and then going and giving it to someone else. It magically becomes unsafe at some point during that. And we've had a few of the city council members, including this mayoral candidate, city councilman, who has flat out said, when asked if it would be safer for them to be living on the streets than to be living at Faith, Hope, and Love, they say, oh, absolutely, because all of these bylaws violations. It's safer for them to live on the streets.
Well, safer for who?
No one. I'm not sure. It's safer for the bylaws, I guess. But I would imagine it violates a bylaw to like live in a park right? Like it probably violates a bylaw to live on a sidewalk. If we're going to get into the legalism of it, the reality is they're probably violating fewer laws and bylaws by being there. But also, who the hell cares? Like they're being fed, they're being taken care of. No one, literally, no one is being harmed here. I'll give you another example that actually this past weekend just happened that You Were the Power was also involved in. There's a lady named Erica Brown, not too far from Gastonia, North Carolina, actually in Columbia, South Carolina. And she, for a few years now, she has a thing she calls Be Kind, Be Great. And every few days, she goes out to some of the libraries and parking lots and areas where homeless people tend to gather. And she'll bring them food and bring them water, bring them basic necessities, things they need, toiletries and stuff like that. And then she started, as she got to know them, realized they also like were lonely. And so she would start spending time with them, actually going out there and having them get together and sing songs, and she'd bring stuff for them. And it became like, not just would she come and feed them, but she'd also like kind of show them that not only did she care about them and the people that were coming to help care about them, but they could care about each other as well. They weren't
Mm.
just separate homeless people. They were actually a community of people trying to help each other, right? So at some point, this got someone angry. And so recently she was threatened by the Richland County Police to stop doing it. And that, she was breaking the law and that she would be fined every time she'd come out and do it. So she or someone else reached out to our group, You Are the Power. We found out about it somehow, and we got involved. And so this past weekend, when they said, you're not allowed to do this, we blasted all over social media and all over in the local community in Columbia. Hey, we're going to go feed a bunch of people. Come join us. We're joining Erica Brown and we're going to feed them. Basically saying, hey, that thing you said we can't do? We're going to, and we actually invited them to come as well. We invited everyone to come out, police and public and everyone else, come out. We're going to feed people. And so I was actually in Mississippi for another event, so I couldn't be there. I was doing something with You Are the Power down there, but many of our activists and a lot of members of the public came and fed every homeless person that came out, and they fed I think a few dozen or a couple hundred people, and gave them water and hung out with them and everything else. And we kept waiting for the police to show up. We were figuring this was going to become a civil disobedience thing, right? And so they didn't, and and a couple hours went by and they didn't. So they stayed a little bit longer and they still didn't. And then towards the end, as people started leaving, a few of the police came, and they came to say that they thought what they were doing is great and they were behind them 100%. And since then, we've heard that the mayor and some of the city council members of Columbia also stand with them. And then we also recently heard that I believe a city council member, someone elected official in Irmo, South Carolina, which is like it's actually neighbors Columbia. It's part of the greater Columbia area.
Right.
They plan to start coming out every Friday to help Erica. So you had politicians who either were on the sidelines or weren't aware of it, or were outright hostile to it, who now are suddenly behind it. You have police officers that were threatening her, who now are saying we're behind you 100%. And whether it's because we showed them that this was a good person doing good things, or because they see the political winds changing and the problem being caused by them
Yeah, the
doing this,
community to support. Yeah.
whatever it was, we now have the government, seemingly anyway, on her side, or at the very least, they're gonna let her do this thing. And there are now other officials that said they're gonna try to find a place where she can do this that isn't like in a parking lot where there's concerns about traffic of cars coming in and stuff like that, and that they'll be in a more safe place, either a park or a building or something they can go into or something. This is all great stuff, and it
Mm.
started with a large enough group of people, not just one woman or a handful of people, but a large enough group of people saying, no, we're going to do it anyway. And that's so often what we have to do. We have to just refuse to comply.
Yeah, and that it makes it easy when it's just Erica on her own or
Yep.
Pastor Moses on his own. But when you have kind of a community backing them up and putting some pressure on the political establishment of the region, then that's a completely different story.
Yep.
And
Yeah,
this is,
no, it's
I mean, it's kind of like inversion of what you see with Black Lives Matter or Antifa, right? Like the reason they'll come up and they'll arrest a guy for being in his house wielding a shotgun with Antifa outside threatening to burn his house down, because it's easier to arrest him than it is to deal with them. And it's kind of the inversion of that, right?
No, it is. And the thing is, I like to say a lot, there's no real such thing as government power. There's not a tangible thing called government power. What there is what they're willing to enforce, and enough of us are willing to comply with. And it
Mm-hmm.
really comes down to that. And you don't need, we talk about the 3%. If 3% of the public refuses to comply with something, it becomes non-enforced. You don't have to necessarily get to 3%. I've watched things like this happen where, I mean, there was nowhere near 3% of the population of the greater Columbia area there. We had maybe, I don't know, a few dozen people there, a couple dozen people there. It wasn't,
Right.
thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. It was enough that it was not easy for them to enforce it.
Yeah, it
And
just
that
made it just uncomfortable enough.
Yep. Yeah. This wasn't going to turn into a civil war. This wasn't that the police were, fearing for their lives and unable to get home. They just saw this is going to be an uncomfortable thing. And I believe it made, policymakers and enforcers take a step back and go, why are we doing this again? Like, what was
Mm,
the point of this? And then when they realized there was no real upside to it, they thought, okay, we can just show up and say we support what they're doing. And that's what
mm,
we're seeing right now. And it took not just her, because she had been doing it for a while. It took enough, just even a large handful of people to say, no, we're not going to do this.
mm, yeah. And so you're doing this pretty much full time now, right? Like,
This is what I do. Yeah.
yeah, this
Yeah.
this is what you're doing now. There's no more running for public office, or you're not looking at those things anymore.
Yeah, I haven't ruled it out in the future. Really, it comes down to how can I best help the movement. And if running for something in the future is the best way to do that, then I'll do that. Right now, the biggest opportunity I see to grow the movement is to demonstrate that liberty works,
Mm,
and to tie it to something that is intuitively understandable to everyone. And I say that that's respect. And I don't mean respect like, thinking someone's great or wanting to be like them. I mean just the most basic level of respecting that someone is a human being, that they have their own life, that they for lack of a better word, they own themselves, that they have their boundaries, and that I also have those things, and that I want people to respect that of me, and that I will respect that of them, and that the higher our level of trust in the expectation that we will be respected is, the better of a society we live in, the happier we are, the more prosperous and harmonious things are where we are. And it all comes down to trusting that people are going to respect us as human beings, and that we will respect them in turn. And anytime that's violated, things are worse. Whether it's a two-bit thug, stealing your car, or robbing you at gunpoint, or beating you up, or the government stealing your car or robbing you at gunpoint or beating you up.
right.
It's human beings not respecting other human beings. And so when we can help people now on these causes, and we can, as we're helping them, demonstrate this to folks, that this is what happens when people aren't respecting each other. And when we do work together and demand respect and get that respect, look how much better things are. And we're not getting into esoteric ideas that they may not understand, and we're not tying a political label to it. We're just
Mm.
saying, look, here's this thing that you intuitively agree with us on. This is what it boils down to, and here's how you can help us. And we've done incredible work already. We've been around for just over a year now, and the work that we've done across the country has been incredible.
Well, and I bet you're seeing much more tangible results, and and it's also interacting and engaging with the culture and changing the culture of the citizens to as to how they view government and like what its
Yep.
purpose is.
Yep.
Because we've all, I think a lot of us, or a lot of people, have become kind of lazy when it comes to looking at government. It's just like now it's viewed as those are our rulers, and
Yep.
we've forgotten this whole idea that we have some say in what goes on in our communities.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you're kind of reminding people like, hey, you got the ability here to stand up and do something about this, instead of just standing around the water cooler all day complaining.
Well, and that's the thing. What's happening? We're even seeing this in the liberty movement. People become so they feel so powerless. The reason I call our organization "You Are the Power" is I'm trying to show people you have way more power than you think you have. As an individual, and especially with us working together, we can, there's, a couple thousand, few thousand of us, and look at all the stuff we've already done. There's so much you can do. We
Mm,
get conditioned to this idea that there's this large and growing monolith and there's not really anything we can do about it. And yes, the politicians are corrupt, but hey, what are you going to do? And so
mm,
it leads people to either just, kind of divest from, not even divest because they're forced to invest in it with taxes and fees, but to not participate in the process and kind of just throw their hands up and say, well, I want nothing to do with this. Or they say, yeah, you know what? I like these people's lies more than these people, so I'm going to vote for them and hope that they own them, even though I know I'm going to get screwed either way. And if you point out that you're getting screwed either way, they go, yeah, I know, whatever, but I like this guy's lies more than this guy's lies.
mm,
All of this comes from people just already being defeated and saying there's nothing I can do about this. And what I'm showing is when we foster a demand for respect, that grows into something that the city can't stop, the county can't stop, the state can't stop, and eventually the federal government can't stop. And you can actually show examples of that. Look at cannabis. Cannabis right now is technically as illegal as heroin or fentanyl.
mm,
It's at the
mm,
same schedule as the most dangerous drugs out there, and it's as illegal now on paper as it was 50 years ago. And yet, the majority of people live in a place where cannabis is legal for them in some capacity, either recreationally or medicinally or both. And
mm.
that's a direct result of people just refusing to comply and it becoming essentially unenforceable, and an increasing number of states going, you know what? If they're going to do it anyway, let them do it for medical reasons, let them do it for recreational reasons, and we'll tax it or whatever, and try to add some regulations to make it safer. There's still a black market because we get taxed it too much. All right, fine. We'll look the other way, and it's just they're essentially the war on drugs ended itself, and
Yeah.
so you've got the federal government increasingly saying, yeah, it's illegal. But if the banks want to fund it, okay, fine, the banks can fund it. And if the insurance companies want to insure the crops, fine, they can do that. But it's still very, very illegal. And at some point, it's just going to reach a point of absurdity where they go, okay, fine, it's not illegal anymore. And that
Yeah.
just came at its base. People will say, oh, it's because of the laws changing. No, no, no. The laws changed because the people wouldn't comply with them.
Right. It's that whole politics is downstream from culture type of argument.
Yes. Yep.
So you were just in Mississippi, and
Yep.
Brian told me there was a murder case. I don't know anything
Yep.
about this. I don't know what's
Yes.
going on in Mississippi. So
Yeah.
tell us what's going on in Mississippi. What were you doing in Mississippi? How are you involved in this case? What's happening?
Yeah, so there is a man there was a man named Rasheem Carter who he was in Taylorsville, Mississippi. He was working as a contractor. He called his mother and I think other family members. I forget that part now, but he called his mother and said, I think someone's going to try to kill me, and if they do, I know who it is. And he later that day went to the police department in Taylorsville and said, someone's trying to kill me. And people were just threatening me on the way here to the police department. Someone please help me. And the police said, no, we're not going to do a thing for you. Go away. So on his way back to the motel he was staying at, because he was there as a contractor,
Mhm.
he disappeared. And the police didn't really say anything. They didn't really update the family. At some point, they gave her a single frame from a trail cam and said, "Is this your son?" And she said, "Yes." I was actually when I was down there, I was talking with different family members, and I was told that each one of them were shown different screenshots or different frames, but they were
Mhm.
all told that was the only one. So that's interesting. And then a month later, the authorities or someone found his body just a matter of yards away from the trail cam, and his body was dismembered and his head was decapitated. And if you look at the photos, like the skull is sliced,
Mhm.
and the police immediately, like that same, like as they're announcing they found this dismembered body, said no foul play occurred, and there's no further investigation needed, because bodies just dismember and decapitate themselves all the time. That's just, that old thing. And the county did say they were going to, or no, this was the county. The state said they were going to start investigating, but they, as far as we can tell, hadn't done anything. And so we got involved. We told the public about it, and then we offered and are offering a $50,000 reward. Someone in that town, probably multiple someones, know what happened, and the median income there is $44,000. $50,000 will change someone's life there, and all they have to do is the right thing. So we went down there to do a press conference for the local media there with the loved ones and the mother of Rashim, and we did like a balloon release ceremony that his family wanted to do in his memory, and then we handed out a ton of flyers offering the reward, and distributed them out to people to hand out in their communities, surrounding areas, and all the local businesses. By the time we left, all the local businesses in the area had the rewards plastered on their windows and on their counters and bulletin boards and stuff like that. And we suspect that we're going to be finding out who did this sooner than later.
So when he was talking to his mom and to the police, he didn't mention, because he says he knows who it was, but he never mentioned who it was.
Yes, he did mention a name. We have chosen not to say that name because we do believe people are innocent until proven guilty. We don't want there to be a pile on someone who may not be responsible for it. And that person has claimed that they are working with authorities and had nothing to do with it. Whether or not that's true, we don't want to turn this into a pile on or a lynching of someone that may not be responsible. So
right. I was just curious if there
he gave a name. He gave a name.
There are people that are being looked at.
There should be a suspect or suspects and people being looked at. I don't know who's being looked at, but I know that people are being looked at now, because we have a team that's actually vetting the tips and ensuring a proper chain of custody of that information, and providing it to relevant local, state, and federal investigating authorities, trusting that one of them is going to want to actually find the killer.
Yeah, I mean, one of my best friends is a former police officer, and I can't imagine, like, I know how he is, and I can't imagine like there not being at least one that's like, we got to figure this out,
Yeah. Well, so the a lot of the speculation in town is that the police are either behind it or closely tied to the people involved. And by that I mean this, when I say this is a small town, this is a small town. It takes you 3 minutes to drive from one side of the town to the other on their main road. And that's if you have to stop at their traffic light. It is a very small town. Everyone there knows each other. This man did not end up 3 miles into the woods on someone's private property where they were dismembered and decapitated without a good number of people there knowing what happened. And the speculation is that one or more police officers were either involved or definitely know what happened. So I don't believe, and obviously, I mean, we'll find out, but I suspect this is more than just ineptitude or apathy among the police. That what brought it to our attention is the fact that as they were announcing they found the body, they were also already announcing that the case was closed and that there was no foul play to this dismemberment and decapitation. There's only one reason you'd say that.
Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't just try to come out with like wild animal attack or something like that.
Or saying, we're not sure what happened, we can't rule anything out, and we'll be investigating it, and then they just never do. I mean, how many cold cases never get really investigated? The majority of murders go unsolved. And honestly, if they had done that, it probably would have never come to our attention. Or because we certainly couldn't take on every case of police not finding a murderer, right?
Right.
But it was the fact that they said it this way, that they insisted that there was no foul play involved at all, and immediately closed the case. Independent autopsy was done, and there was no reason from that autopsy to indicate that this had anything to do with a wild animal.
Yeah, well, here in the Gulf Coast over the last probably I don't know, 5, 10 years, we've been experiencing a new resurgence in the population of black bears down here,
Mm,
which they had pretty much all but disappeared from this region. But here
yeah.
over the last few years, we've been starting to see them pop up again, and I'm surprised they didn't use that as an excuse, because
Right.
black bears, whenever it comes to bear attacks on humans, black bears are more likely to attack humans than grizzly bears, polar bears, any of
Mm,
these other bears,
yeah,
because
yeah,
they're smaller bears. They live in closer proximity to us, so
yeah.
you're going to get more attacks that way. So that would
Right.
have been kind of probably their easiest sell if they weren't from Mississippi. Um,
Well, they literally did the meme, right? They did the "there's nothing to see here, folks. Nothing. Everyone just move along," while the fireworks are going off behind them, like in what Leslie Nielsen in Naked Gun. That's like literally what they did,
right.
and it got everyone's attention, and it certainly got our attention. And we there were some protests a while back where thousands of people or hundreds of people showed up in protest, and that's all great that they did that. I'm not against doing protests and rallies, but you can't just show up, say I'm mad, and then walk away, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't. There has to be some actual like serious action that happens behind that. You have to show up to the city councils and hold them accountable. You have to call for legislative or procedural changes and push for them to happen and get a movement behind you to push for them. You have to offer rewards. You have to take actual human action to get these things accomplished.
Okay. What other projects are y'all working on at the time? I'm sure y'all
So
got
we've
more
been
stuff.
working on fighting eminent domain abuse. Local governments just love stealing property. Holy crap, did they love stealing property for the most specious of reasons, because for the largest part they've gotten away with it. And that's one of the things I love is the biggest thing we often do is just create attention for something. We don't even have to start rallying or anything. The government finds out that the public knows about it and they back right off. Most of the time that's what happens. Our causes are consist of putting up a post or a couple of tweets and they back right off because they don't want the heat. They're not used to it. We dealt with a CPS that had medically kidnapped a child, a newborn baby. When I say newborn, I mean a few days old, because they chose to use a midwife instead of a pediatrician, and instead of a OBGYN, and their doctor didn't like that, so he called CPS in the middle of the night. A few hours later, they came to the home and detained the parents and took the baby. And so after a few weeks, we ended, or a couple weeks, we ended up finding out about it. A few days later, baby Mila has returned home to her family. So we've been involved in all sorts of stuff, and we got more stuff coming. But it's really, they all boil down to, there is some number of human beings who forgot that they're just are briefly forgetting that they're just people like the rest of us,
Mm.
and have completely set aside the same respect that they would typically have for another human being if they were just walking down the street. And because they have this badge, or they have this role that's been given to them, or they work in this marble building, they suddenly believe that they have this they can put aside the just basic respect that we should all have for each other as human beings, or non-aggression as we would call it. And we're calling them out, and if that doesn't work, then we keep fighting until they get held accountable and back off.
I remember a couple of years ago that I had seen a statistic that the state of Kansas was responsible for more civil asset forfeiture than like any other state in the United States.
I believe that.
Have
Per
you?
capita, I'm sure that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering if y'all are working with any of those instances with civil asset forfeiture.
I don't know if we've done one in Kansas, but we've definitely done we've done some civil forfeiture cases. And the problem with civil forfeiture is, unlike eminent domain, which is all handled locally, civil asset forfeiture is basically a money laundering scheme.
Mm,
The government at the local or state level steals the property, then they push it through the Federal Department of Justice's civil forfeiture program, who holds it. They don't hold it. It's still wherever it's being impounded, but they take custody, ownership of it. They process it and make sure it went through whatever their criteria is. Then they hand it back. It literally is not moved. Like, it's still where it was, but it's being given back, the custody given back at some later time to whoever seized it, and they get some piece of it. And the reason they do it this way, part of the reason, well, two reasons they do it. Number one, so that the federal government gets a piece of it. But number two, the reason they do it that way is it makes it exponentially harder to try to fight to get your stuff back. So if the government takes a few $1,000s worth of your stuff, and on principle, you decide to spend more than that on an attorney to try to get it back, you go to the local court, because that's the jurisdiction, and the police and the city or the county, whatever municipality, says, Your Honor, it's not ours anymore. It belongs to the federal government. So then you try to take it and appeal it to federal court, and if they even take your case after tens of thousands of dollars, the federal government says, Your Honor, it's not ours anymore. We gave it back to the state. So it's like literally like this way of making it immeasurably harder to get your property back by basically handing off chain of custody on paper, and letting the government take a piece of it. And you're never going to believe. Do you know who the politician was that introduced this, that suggested this, that this was allowed under DOJ rules?
No.
I got a hint for you. He's the president.
Right now? Really?
In
Oh my God.
1970, I want to say 8, in the 1970s or 1980s, Joe Biden, who was trying to make a name for himself as Law and Order Joe Biden, talked to the Department of Justice and said, the way I'm reading our rules on impounding property, and it's all from the war on drugs, if the government at any level suspects someone of committing a crime, even before they're tried, or even if they're not charged with anything, they can take the property as a civil measure, not a criminal one. So there's not as much due process, and basically, dare them to sue us for it and run them through the ringer if they try to, and actually even threaten to press criminal charges if they do that. And the federal government looked, and their attorney said, yeah, no, our rules would allow that. And very quickly they started creating the program, and it has gotten kind of it's sort of like a frog in the boiling water thing. They just keep adding to it until sometime in the 2010s, civil forfeiture that we know of, because some areas don't actually document all of their instances to the public, but the ones we know of now account for, as of the 2010s, and I'm sure it's even higher now, account for more known robbery than all private sector theft combined.
Yeah, I've heard that. Well, I remember talking to my buddy Michael Harris, who's an attorney up in Dallas, and we were chatting about a case that he had dealt with, and I don't remember all the details, but this guy had been raising money for an event, and so he was carrying a lot of small bill cash because he was taking in donations. Well, and I think it's all over the United States, but I know in the state of Texas, if you have over $10,000 in cash, it can be confiscated as drug money. Right. So
just for being that much money. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. It has to be at least $10,000. But once you hit that $10,000 mark, all right, now you're a drug dealer. I don't care what you were saying. You could have been selling donuts. It must have been cracking that sugar, but insanity. And so when he had that money taken from him, and it was the money he was supposed to be using, I want to say, for a funeral for a loved one.
Yep.
And he tried to get the money back. In order to get the, I think, $11,000 back that had been confiscated from him, it was going to cost him $250,000 to sue the government to get them. It's insanity.
Yeah. And it's designed that way. It is literally designed that way. And, they said the way it was written, or the way that it was introduced, is this is to go after those big kingpins, and we may not be able to get them for something else, but we can certainly take all their stuff. Well, putting aside the fact that if you can't prove this person is a drug kingpin, you shouldn't be taking a thing from them. But let's put that aside. The vast majority, I think the average documented criminal civil forfeiture case, they take about $1,800 worth of either money or stuff on average. They're robbing working class and poor people because they look like they have too much money. Oh, you're walking down the street and you got $2,000. That seems suspicious. Boom, it's mine now. and I know you're not going to fight to get it back. In Tennessee, there's an organization called For All Tennessee. They actually fought to get something introduced that, and they got part of it. I forget exactly what part, but the thing they were fighting for was to get it so that you could use a public defender, use a public attorney to try to get your stuff back. And the idea was, okay, great. You want to make it prohibitively expensive to fight to get your stuff back? Okay, great. We'll make it prohibitively expensive for you to take $2,500 from some innocent person that you don't have any proof they did anything wrong. We'll make the state pay for this public defender, this public I guess in that case public plaintiff attorney to sue to get their stuff back. And that's really what it's going to take. And it's going to take, I talk a lot with people that aren't libertarian, and I explain this stuff to them. And the biggest thing we fight on fighting this stuff is they can't believe that this could possibly be happening.
Right.
They'll go, oh, no, that's for drug dealers. And I'll say, no, this is for civil forfeiture is separate from property that's taken from people who have been tried and convicted of a crime. That's part of their punishment, is that they lose those things. This is a program where people who are more often than not, never charged with a crime, just have their stuff stolen from them. And then I'll tell them examples of that, and they'll say, oh, well, those must be rare. And I'm like, no, billions of dollars a year. I think we're up to like $7 or $8 billion a year. And the police will come out and say, well, but this is how we get our cruisers so we can protect you. And many members of the public either say, I don't believe it, or, well, I guess they need it and I'll have to trust them. And that's that sort of normalcy bias. People don't want to believe that, the people that they've been trusting to protect them are the biggest thieves on the block, and proud of it, and justify it, and have rationalized why this is perfectly fine to rob from poor people.
Yeah. I mean, I think if I remember correctly, I was talking about Kansas earlier, but if I remember correctly, it was the Kansas City Police Department earned more money from civil asset forfeiture than they did from traffic tickets.
Yeah, I believe it. Remember the case of the feds went into a bunch of safety deposit boxes in, I believe, Los Angeles, and it was part of a drug investigation.
Yes, I remember.
And then the agents were like, we could just take all of this. Like, really, if you think about it, it's suspicious that some of this might have been tied to drugs. So really, I mean, we don't know all of this. The bank could be in on it. So they literally stole, and I think it was like $187 million, millions of dollars of property that they stole. And when the judge ruled that they had to give it back, they said, we can't give it back. We already spent a bunch of it. We don't have it anymore. And so I believe that's still being fought and appealed, last I checked. But they said their defense was, Your Honor, we already spent it. Can you imagine going to court and saying, yeah, Your Honor, I know I stole like $87 million worth of property, but in my defense, I already spent it.
Yeah, I stole that art from the gallery, but I sold it.
It's gone.
I spent the money. It's gone. I
fenced it. I spent that money.
Well,
I could give you my shirt. I can give you my, $10,000 Gucci shirt. This is from Walmart, but I can give you my I think it's like $7, but I can give you my, my car or whatever, but we already spent it. It's gone. It's not ours.
And that's another thing that happens with civil asset forfeiture. Like if you're in a traffic stop, right, and you get pulled over and they find whatever their median of money is that allows them the access to your property, they can take your car too, because now that's part of the crime.
All they have to do is say they suspected a crime was committed.
Yeah.
Preponderance of the evidence is basically the threat. And it's wild because they're saying, oh, well, we're just holding it until it's been properly adjudicated. And then when the courts say give it back, they go, we already spent it. Well, what happened? We were just holding it until it's adjudicated. Like, at the very least, they should have to never, ever use or spend it in any way until some court has looked that case over. At the very least.
Yeah.
At the very least.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah.
And so there's so many of these cases like that. I mean, we're on the back foot fighting some of this stuff, right? And so it's good to see that you are taking the action and getting involved and understand how to engage the communities in fighting back, at least where they're capable at this point, because we are
Yeah.
on the back foot on so many of these instances. So many of these things have flown under the radar and gotten completely bloated and out of hand. So it's really good to see that you are doing this work. And I know that it's something you have a lot of passion for.
I do, and the reason it's working is because we're stripping as much of the politics out of it as possible. I mean, I know I'm the 2020 Libertarian VP candidate or whatever, but I rarely talk about that. Never talk about that when I'm doing these events, because I want to make something very clear. We are human beings who are watching human beings being abused by other human beings, and we want them to stop, because if they put aside whatever capacity they think allows them to do this, they would never do this. They would teach their children never to do this. They would never tolerate anyone doing this. They would say that anyone doing this is a bad person, but because they've put on this special hat or this special badge or this, special title they've given themselves, or in some cases we've given them by electing them, they somehow think that they can't respect us. And when you boil it down to that, to something that like a 7-year-old child, me watching Cops when I was 8, can get, when you boil it down to that and you strip it of the politics, which forces people to divide into different camps and fight each other instead of fight the actual problem, when you strip it of that, and when you strip it of esoteric sounding ideologies and complicated sounding principles that take a long time to comprehend and all of that stuff for most people, if instead you just boil it down to, we are people helping people who are being hurt by people, we should be demanding that they not hurt people like that, no matter who they are, and we can work together as people to help other people. And if you keep it that simple, it is incredible how you can get people working together. Our volunteer leadership team is comprised of libertarians, Republicans, Democrats, independents, people that aren't really sure what they are politically, non-voting anarchists, and that's in our leadership. Our membership is even more politically diverse because we're pulling the politics out of it, man. Like if I run for office, I'm doing it as a member of a party that has a political thing and has a set of policies or whatever. This work that we're doing, I'm stripping the politics from it. This is wrong. Stealing is wrong. Threatening is wrong. Kidnapping is wrong. Assault is wrong. Murder is wrong. Forcing people to live on the streets is wrong. All of these things are wrong. And it doesn't matter what capacity you've given yourself to do it. You shouldn't do it, and we'll fight together until you stop doing it. And if folks like what we're doing and want to become a part of it, I invite you to join us at You Are the Power. Our website is youarethepower.net. We'd love to have you become a member today.
You know what's really great about this? It struck me as you're just talking there in that little spiel you got, man. And it just reminds me, they like that Republican Democrat binary. And what you are doing is so much more powerful than anything you could have done running as a libertarian candidate.
As anything, honestly, it's more powerful than what I could do running as a Republican.
True. Yeah.
And I can't imagine myself running as a Democrat. But if I did run as a Democrat, then I same thing. Like I feel like what we are doing right now on the cultural level, and then working its way down to the political level, is already beginning to snowball. I said the snowflakes are turned into snow clumps, and it's starting to form a bit of a ball. It's beginning to snowball into something that's going to be unstoppable, because you can't then go, yeah, but what about the Democrat? We don't care about that. Yeah, what about the Republic? I don't, it doesn't, like, none of this matters. Well, how come your party can't win? It's not about a party. Like when I go out, you know how often, like, I don't know if you're an LP member or not, but like often when you're a libertarian and you'll say, this thing is wrong, we need to fight against it, the first thing people will say is, you can't even get elected. And so now you got to argue with them about ballot access. I don't ever have to do that. I'll have people show up to events and go, man, how can we help the Libertarian Party get more votes? And I'll go, well, I got some thoughts on that, but that's not what I'm here for. We're helping people right now. No one shows up when we say, hey, it's wrong for the government to try to kick homeless people out on the streets. Here's how you can help us fight back against that. No one shows up and goes, well, it's not like you could win an election. Okay. We never said that. No one
who
said,
cares?
no one.
We're
no
actually
one's
helping real
us.
people right now. We're actually engaged in something real at the moment. Let's
and you can vote for whoever you want for. We don't care. Yeah, we don't care. You can love Biden, hate Trump, love Trump, hate Biden, hate them both, love them. I don't care. It doesn't matter. None of that matters to me right now. Do you agree with me on this? Okay, great. Here's how you can help. And give them an immediate call to action. You can either just, stand and cheer on the sidelines. That's fine as well. Or you can actually join us and help. Give them a tangible thing that they can actually do to help.
Right. No, and I love what you're doing, man. It's
Thank
really
you.
inspirational. I'm
I
glad
appreciate it.
you found a lane, because I know how, man, when I was watching you speaking for that city council, was it Gastonia? Is that correct? Am I saying that?
Gastonia. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I was watching you, I've never seen you. I've watched you speak. I've been on podcasts with you. I've seen you on. I've never seen you mad. I was like, whoa, he's about to go up there and fight somebody. Like
do you,
non-aggression
do you,
principle, my ass.
do you know why I got so upset? I came there with what I wanted to say, but I didn't speak first. I spoke after a couple dozen people. Some of them were Pastor Moses and some of his congregation, and a pastor of another church that's been helping them, and some other congregants. And but most of the people, or a good number of the people who spoke, were residents of Faith, Hope, and Love, who were looking into the uncaring, apathetic, uninterested eyes of these city council members and saying, "You're taking my home.
Mm,
I helped this person over there survive an overdose by giving them Narcan, and then we got them back on their feet, and they're look at how much better they're doing just a couple weeks from now. What would have happened if we hadn't had access to those things and we weren't regularly fed? I've lost loved ones out on these streets because they had preventable illnesses and no one was around them to let them know what was happening to them, and they didn't even care. Why can't you just let one of them said, I'm going to end up living in behind your house because that's where I was living before, was behind the subdivision that a couple of you live in. What am I supposed to do right now? And that just fired me up. And I'm watching these city council members who were just waiting for them to shut up so they could go back to congratulating each other in the rest of the meeting like they'd done up until that point. And I thought, I've got 2 minutes to explain to these people why it should matter to them. And I started with look at what you're actually doing. Look at these people, and I figured out what your scam is here. But then I ended it with saying, we have your contact information, and I'm going to make sure that every single person knows who you are and what you're doing and the suffering that you're causing. And I've done that just on Twitter. We got close to 3 million views on that video. And I know firsthand that they've been receiving a lot of emails and phone calls, because I put right on every time I had that video on all my social media. It's gotten millions of views, and more to come, because that's not time sensitive. No one knows when that happened. So it's still continuing to get hundreds
mm,
of thousands of new views every couple of weeks.
right.
And so those people's phone numbers and email addresses are there. And I'm sure they're hearing lots of people telling them what they think about that.
Yeah.
And you know what? You want to make people suffer in silence? I'm going to make sure you suffer publicly.
Yeah.
And all you have to do, literally all you have to do to get me to stop doing it and to go back and thank you and congratulate you and shake your hand and hug you and take pictures next to you and say how great you are, is to just act like a human being who cares about other human beings, and just do the right thing and back off.
Yeah. For sure, man. So you are the power.net, right?
Youarethepower.net. Yeah.
Cool, man. Yeah, I'll definitely get the link in there, and
Thank you.
I plan on getting involved somehow. I'll see what I can do.
You're
Even
already
it.
involved. You're helping people
Well,
find out
nah,
about it.
but I know you're doing good work, man, and I like what you're doing. In this Pastor Moses story, as soon as I heard it, I was like, I want to know more about this guy. Like, what's
Yeah.
going on here? Because that immediately caught my attention. Like, that is insanity,
Yeah.
So you are the power.net. We're going to make sure that we get this linked up, put up at the Libertarian Institute, and we're going to do what we can to help you out, buddy.
That means a lot, man. Thank you. And thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate you making the time. And I know you're moving around a lot. I'm busy too, so it took us a minute to make it happen, but we got it.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Thank you for your patience. I appreciate it. And
no
I'll
doubt,
be happy to
dude.
be on in the future, man. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll definitely do it again. I'm just going to stop the recording here, and we will say our goodbyes.